Hello and welcome to the inaugural podcast of Trauma, Healing, and Nutrition, a new podcast series sponsored by Repair. Repair is a health and disability justice organization based in Los Angeles, and I am your host and the director of the organization. My name is Beth Ribet, and I'm really excited to launch this series, which has been a good dream of ours for a while. So this first episode, I'm joined by my wonderful friend and colleague, Susie Hess, who is a clinical social worker and the co-founder of an organization called Trauma Informed Los Angeles, and she also is one of the faculty in the School of Social Work at the University of Southern California. And I've asked Susie to join me here today to just help start a conversation about this podcast, its content, its prospective audiences, and some of the subjects that we see as kind of recurring features. So again, I want to welcome Professor Susie Hess.
Thank you, Beth. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to tell us. And I do have some questions just to sort of start us off. Why trauma, healing, and nutrition? And what does each word mean to you? And why have a podcast about all three?
So that's a terrific question. Thanks for posing it. I'll start with trauma. So trauma is essentially the state of being in which a person has been subjected to experiences of harm that are significant enough to challenge or overtax their immediate coping skills. Trauma can be varying levels of severity, from experiences that are perhaps traumatic in the moment, and then we are rapidly able to process them and release that trauma, to those that may take weeks or months to work through. And then there are more severe forms and levels of trauma that may become a constant in a person's life and be the basis for developing disabilities or illnesses like post-traumatic stress disorder or complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Healing is inclusive of a number of different possibilities and imperatives. So healing can be a very physiological process, and one way or another it usually is, and also a very emotional, sometimes spiritual process. And in this podcast, we'll certainly work from the premise that bodies and minds are always integrated and connected, so we're never really presuming an either or between the body and the psyche. But healing can also be a collective process. So healing can be about changing structures that are causing trauma or harm, bringing communities that have experienced collective harms together to participate in activities that are healing throughout, creating accountability and justice. That's also part of the process of healing. And again, it can happen at very small, localized micro levels or very large, systemic macro levels. And we sometimes talk about that in terms of positive forms of systems change or social change. And nutrition, and that's a really important one. You'll find a lot of conversations that are, some of which are really amazing, happening in the United States right now about trauma and healing, at least partly, though not solely, catalyzed by the presence of the trauma-informed movement, which has come to span a lot of different communities and disciplines and fields. But I started this podcast in part just because I noticed such a void in terms of conversations about trauma and nutrition, even among people who I think have excellent consciousness about trauma. I think that we have a lot more to think about. And to define nutrition, which was your original question, or to talk about what the term means to me, I think about nutrition as everything that the body needs to take in as nourishment. So nutrition can be, of course, food, but we also can get nutrients such as minerals through water. And we can get nutrition through teas and vitamin supplements and herbal extracts. And so the sort of array of things that essentially are about taking in nutrients or nourishment, all of that makes up nutrition and the field of nutrition, both as a sort of healthcare practice and the nutrition that's something that's communal and very individual and personal. So this podcast is linking these three things together and talking about the relationship between trauma and nutrition, always with an emphasis on or a primary concern with identifying and thinking through pathways to healing.
So interesting. And I think I'm one of those people who has a lot of knowledge on trauma and healing and not the nutrition part. So I am looking forward to learning. So what does it mean to address trauma through nutrition or to heal with nutrition? So how would that work, or what would that look like?
So that's a great question. And to answer it, I'm going to try giving a tiny little crash course on oxidative stress and antioxidants. And we've talked about this before, but I'm excited to share it with our podcast audiences. One of the things I find is that when you say antioxidant, everybody's heard that term, and they can probably name some of them. Like most commonly, people will say vitamin C, right? And they know that that's an antioxidant, or they'll identify an antioxidant-rich food. So they'll say blueberries, right? Which is one people usually know is very antioxidant-rich, which it is. And then when I ask a room full of people, can anyone tell us what exactly is an antioxidant? Then it's like crickets chirping, right? Nobody knows, or they're sort of, well, they're good for you, right? There's this sort of uncertainty. We've all heard of them and we don't understand what they are. And to understand and have context for what an antioxidant is, we have to understand the concept of oxidative stress. And I'm going to explain that a little bit and try not to overwhelm folks who are not particularly science inclined. And then I want to talk about what does that have to do with trauma. So to explain the concept of oxidative stress, I want to bring up another term that you've probably heard and probably don't know how to define unless you're really somebody who's very, very immersed in health and medicine. And even then, it's interesting how many, for instance, MDs or nurses can't actually tell you what an antioxidant is. The term, though, that I'm thinking of is free radical. And a free radical refers to essentially an unstable molecule that exists in human bodies, and as part of its function, will try to remedy its instability by essentially robbing the walls of a person's cells of usually an electron, right? And so if it's missing an electron, it will, imagine it, we'll sort of try to anthropomorphize or picture a free radical as if it were a person. It would be sort of an aggressive, grumpy person who was trying to work out their issues by stealing from others. We have a lot of models in our dysfunctional world of people who do that, whether they're nasty former partners or exploitative bosses or out-and-out colonizers, you name it. So picture this, and again, it's ironic that the term used to describe this unstable molecule is a free radical. I've always sort of laughed at that and said, really sounds like they're kind of picking on 60s era hippies. Like, I think they need a new name. So for myself, I will often refer to them as like settler colonists, right? Or we'll just say unstable molecules. But the conventional medical term is a free radical. So for the sake of avoiding confusion, that's what I'm speaking about. So you've got this unstable molecule, which if you remember from, say, taking a junior high or high school physics class, is essentially one of the smallest units of matter. and it's got this inherent structural instability. Something's missing. And so it goes and tries to repair itself by ripping out a part of the wall of one of your cells. And if it succeeds in doing that, it leaves a little scar or injury on the wall of that cell. And that injury is referred to as oxidative stress or oxidative damage. So this aggressive little unit of being has damaged something else in order to try to make itself whole. And human cells are pretty darn resilient. They can take a lot of damage and still continue to do their work. And we also keep making new ones. So we replace and repair our cells many, many times in every part of our body over the life course. So a little oxidative damage is hardly the end of the world. But we have trillions of cells in our body, and we have an often, I would say, uncounted number of these unstable molecules that can come and damage our cells. So when enough of that oxidative damage accumulates, a number of things can happen. One is that a cell in your body will just be less good at doing the work it's supposed to do. So it might, let's say it's a cell in your lungs, it may not be as efficient or fast or as effective in filtering oxygen into your bloodstream. Or if it's a cell in your liver, it may have a harder time detoxing or breaking down fats or doing any of the work that it needs to do in your body. So it may just mean that your body doesn't run as well. Or the cell might die. Right? If it takes enough oxidative damage, it dies prematurely. And if that's happening too often, then we start to have deficiencies in parts of our body, whether, again, it's our brain, our heart, one of the major organs in our gastrointestinal system, our lungs. And so we'll see a sort of overall malfunction as more cellular damage cause actual cell death. And another possibility is that increasingly damaged cells become essentially less cancer resistant. And so cellular damage, oxidative stress can contribute to the start of cancerous growths in the body. So oxidative stress is linked to just about, in one way or another, every human disease. I won't say every, but even if it's not a cause of a disease, which it wouldn't be in every case, it affects our resilience and our ability to manage disease. It certainly affects our immune systems. And so oxidative stress is one of the major contributors to premature death, to people developing illnesses and disabilities. And so all of this is very alarming and interesting. But there's two questions left to answer. One is, what is an antioxidant? And the other is, what does all this have to do with trauma? So we've talked about oxidative stress. An antioxidant is a beneficial substance or compound which helps the body deal with, prevent, or repair oxidative stress. And it can do that in a lot of ways. So you can picture an antioxidant as being something like a therapist or mediator who says to this, if these little cellular players could speak to each other, will walk up to a free radical and say, there are ways to solve your problems without injuring anybody else. I can help you with that. I have a spare electron or maybe a hydrogen atom or whatever it is that you need. We can take care of you. No need to cause harm. Other antioxidants are more like paramedics or other forms of first responders or like nurses. They're coming in and addressing the damage and helping to repair it so that the consequences of oxidative stress are less long-term, less significant, and less far-reaching. And still others are more like really tough, amazing activists. So if you ever have, the image I always go to is like watching a line of activists with their arms linked, blocking off a side street so that a march can happen in a city. You want to picture these like, this is a shield, a barrier. You are not going to hurt that cell. So you can imagine an antioxidant as a defender, right? A defender, a protector, a healer, a neutralizer